Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here with us today. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for a very special program today, starting off with ALN Thursday at 3 with Steve Wyton, and moving after an hour into a program with Kimon Onuma and Cyril Verlet, and we'll talk a little more about that in just a moment. We want to thank our Platinum organizational member, Onuma System, Building Informed Environments, and you can find out more at onuma-bim.com and more in the second program in an hour's time. We want to thank our patron members, as well as all our organizational members who make programming like this possible. Please reach out if you're interested in working with us. We would love to talk more. And with that, we will talk more about the next program. Kimon Onuma and Cyril Verlet showcase their combined capabilities to deliver dramatically improved building information to owners for lifecycle management. And more to come on that, I think, from Mike in a second. And just one more event we want to push on July 13th. We have ALN Thursday at 3 with Mike Imany and Jack Dempsey, discussing the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine strategies for renewal of federal facilities. So don't miss any of these upcoming programs. And with that, I will say, if you're out there, we'd love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. So with that, Mike Bordenero, ALN Executive Director, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Nick. How are you doing?
Good.
So
happy to be here.
Should we make it an official week off and that we're not going to have an ALN Thursday at 3 next July 6th?
That's an interesting question. We'll maybe we can poll the audience throughout the program.
Yeah, would
you attend?
Yeah, if anybody wants to be in an open program or something, just, next week's open for people. But this week is really special. Steve Wyton at Calgary gave us one of our best stories of why asset management works and how it helps a city. There was confusion in Calgary. Steve, let me just see if I've got this right. We'll do it really quickly. There was confusion in the city about transportation budgeting. The bridge department wanted money for bridges because they thought bridges were going to solve the problem. The expressways wanted money for expressways because they thought the expressways were going to solve the problem. The buses wanted money for buses. Trains, were going to solve the problem. Roads. But the city got together and said, what's the real problem we're trying to solve? We're trying to get people from one end of the city to the other end of the city, and that's hardest to do during morning rush hour and evening rush hour. Yep, that's the problem. Why don't we provide subsidies for rideshare? Does that kind of sum it up, Steve?
Sorry, I was having a problem unmuting there. Yeah, that's actually one of the issues that we deal with constantly within the city of Calgary and other municipalities as well, is looking at various types of options for providing service. So yeah, you've nailed one of the things. And it's not just about things like rideshare options, so the services that we directly as a city provide, but it's looking to other types of future technologies. So now with e-cars and e-vehicles becoming part of a disruptive technology, how do we as a municipality also start to accept that and start to program perhaps differently what our infrastructure might look like to accommodate those kind of vehicles? Also, as well, too, things like, ped traffic, or new accessibility requirements. We have an aging population, and so not all of them are able-bodied. So how are we making all of our infrastructure more accessible for all ages and all levels of accessibility, whether you're walking, you're riding on a bicycle, you're in a wheelchair, etc. So it's a myriad of different types of accommodation that we're trying to provide from a transportation perspective, getting people safely and affordably from A to B.
So very good, thank you. And Steve has been a guest with us before, as I mentioned, but it's been a while. And we typically start by saying, how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey? Well, you've only been at Calgary. That's not much of a story. But actually, one of the reasons why we're talking is because there has been a reshaping of asset management for the city. Can you explain that and how that has related to your new title?
Sure, absolutely. Maybe a little background as well, a little of myself.
Sure.
So you're right, Mike. I've been with the city now, City of Calgary, for 29 years. I'm a structural engineer by formal training, by background, with an MBA. So started with the city back in 1994, so 29 years. Started as an engineer in training and looking at all aspects of the business, from operations to project engineering, and as well too from a strategic management perspective. So that's where I've come from, and where I become really turned on with respect to asset management was I was accountable for developing our life cycle plans for concrete sidewalks back in, say, the late 1990s, early 2000s. And even back then, we had identified that with a fairly large size city of Calgary. I don't know for many of you if you're familiar with the city of Calgary, if you've ever been here or traveled through Calgary on your way to the Rocky Mountains into Banff. We're a municipality of about 1.5 million people, so we're a large city in Canada. We're the third largest city by geographic area within Canada, and we have a fairly hefty operating and capital budget. So that's just to give you some perspective. But as well, we manage about $100 billion of physical infrastructure. So it's again as well too a large infrastructure holding that we have from a municipal perspective. So anyways, back to where we were, we had, because of the size of this portfolio of assets, when I became the manager of what we called corporate project and asset management, my role on the asset management side of the business was really the corporate policy owner, if you will. And we had a number of discrete individual asset management offices, if I can call it that, whether it be our IT department or our transportation department, say roads and transit, recreation, parks, et cetera, et cetera. You can think of all the asset classes that we own as a municipality. And that worked for quite a long time to kickstart our asset management program. My role was about really owning our corporate policy that spanned the entire organization, and about our guidance and practices and ensuring compliance. Well, as of August the 1st of last year, the city has changed pace, if you will. So I've shed the project management side of our business and done a deep dive on really coordinating, if I can say in a safe environment, centralizing our asset management practice under one group. Now, we recognize that there's various levels of maturity and ability to move these disparate offices, these separate autonomous offices under one roof. So that's something that we're working on, and it takes quite some time. So it's getting into under the hood of understanding whose role is what, and how are we appropriately staffed to start to bring together under one roof, doing a centralized asset management approach. So that's really what my role is focused on right now, what we are calling assess and adjust. We've declared this is what our asset management organization looks like for a future state, and now it's just slowly bringing together a number of organizations. So in a nutshell, what my group does do is really from the front end of asset management, so asset inspection services. So if it's analyzing the physical condition of bridges or performance of our pavement assets, or physical condition of our underground water pipe, storm pipe, etc., right through to assessing performance based on risk, establishing life cycle management plans and recommending investments requirements for a long-term future. What's cool is by doing this now, it actually is allowing us to also start to think much more strategically about our physical infrastructure. So it's not just about managing assets, if I can say that, and doing traditional, say, life cycle engineering and reliability engineering type of approaches, which is important, but as well too starting for us to think as an organization, perhaps what businesses should we be in and what businesses shouldn't we be in. So we're stepping away from our assets themselves and starting to rethink our service model and thinking maybe it's more appropriate for us to be onboarding third parties from an asset ownership perspective to identify maybe we can build a better relationship through a P3 or through asset monetization type of methods and allow them to own the assets while we ultimately still own the strategy and the service requirement, and assuring that Calgarians and our region is still getting best value for our infrastructure investments. That was a lot of stuff to digest there. And I did see a comment come up, and I apologize. I don't have my
that's okay. I'll bring it up. But what I wanted to say is what you've just described is asset management maturity. And you are a shining example to the world of how a municipality should be thinking and where they can be moving to. So definitely applaud that. And then what about personal property? What about fleet? What about other types of assets?
Oh, that's a great question. So things like fleet. So when you're talking about, I'm assuming it's the city of Calgary's fleet. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So we do have a centralized fleet function, and fleet themselves, they actually do manage physical assets within our overall asset management policy, but they manage that fleet as a separate part of our, so it's not within my organization, my shop, but they still philosophically follow all of our principles with regards to long range life cycle investment, and they manage themselves truly as a revenue generating part of our organization.
And IT is similar?
Exactly the same. Actually, what's one of the cool things that's coming out of this realignment is IT is accountable really for our software and our hard technology type of assets, servers and what have you. What we're starting to explore now is, as we get in under the hood of centralizing our asset management functions, we're seeing as well too an opportunity for starting to think more strategically about our asset data. So really treating, I'm sure you've all heard of this concept of data as a strategic asset, and starting to think of our data no differently than we would a bridge or a building, where the data itself has a life cycle. It requires asset stewardship. It requires care, love, and feeding as well, so that we can make informed decisions on our physical infrastructure. So that's something that I must admit I'm a little geeked out on. I'm quite jazzed for going forward as part of our new organizational structure.
Well, excellent. Then you'll be very happy with the following program, which thank you for sticking around and doing a little prelude, where we'll be talking about data as an asset. Kimono Numa and Cyril Verlet. Kimon led a work group in 2016 for the ALN, and the finding of his work group was data is an asset. And so yeah, we're very familiar with that, and look forward to sharing you some of the things that we're doing there. So how did Calgary get to this next level of maturity? What was the trigger that encouraged, because you got so many things going right there. Like in the city of Chicago, they're not even interested in meeting about asset management. I guess there's so many problems that they can't even start thinking about doing things a new way. And here you've got a team and you're talking about making it better and changing strategies. What's going on in Calgary that other cities can learn from?
Yeah, well, back in the early to mid 2000s, actually, I'll admit, this is just when I came onto the scene. We had a group of senior management, our top management, that were really quite interested, right through to our mayor. I will be very honest. Our mayor at the time really saw the value of opening up a public conversation around infrastructure and infrastructure investment. So the mayor at the time was very much a huge advocate for our program. And it's interesting because conservatives and liberals alike, both in their own way, are also incredibly supportive of asset management. So at our council level, if you think no matter what side you're coming from, the liberals will look at this as an opportunity for making a business case to invest in assets like, say, parks or recreation spaces, those kinds of assets that provide larger social outcome, or say housing, affordable housing. So this is an opportunity for us to start to analyze, get under the hood and justify investments in those very social focused or environmentally focused groups. So they see that as an opportunity. The conservatives see this as an opportunity for us to justify infrastructure investment and perhaps even to scrutinize investment, and for us to ensure transparency and accountability of how we're investing as a business, and even leveraging other opportunities. So third-party investment and bringing together other groups, not just the city of Calgary. So it's really quite cool to see how two very different parts of an organization can come together from different lenses, but moving forward and propelling an asset management program. So for me, it was great to see that over the last 10 years. What really for me started to make a difference was probably in about 2020, 2019, thereabouts. Through the pandemic, we started to see, and especially in Calgary as well too, so starting about 2015, I must say, we were hit with an economic downturn really based upon oil and gas. We are a resource-based economy here in Calgary, and with an economic downturn coming out of oil and gas, where we're really forced to think and scrutinize about our infrastructure investments, because our already limited scarce resource is becoming even more scarce. So we really had to rethink and re-strategize from a financial resiliency lens. What are we picking and choosing our investments on? And what are we actually going to start to not necessarily divest, but what are we starting to not invest from a risk-based perspective? So we started to look at that as well. I will admit openly that we did have a couple of infrastructure failures that our regulator here in Alberta, PEGA, it's called, our engineering regulator, started to look at us and say, really, maybe you should start to think about how you are managing your physical infrastructure, and maybe there needs to be a little more due diligence on how you're managing the practice of engineering, including asset management. So there's a few things that came together that really took us, if in my mind's eye, in my opinion, forced us to a next level of asset management maturity. Yeah, that's some thoughts. And interesting also, something that's emerging that I'm also quite interested in addition to innovation of data as an asset, is the starting for us to think about our natural asset inventory as assets as well. And so this is something that I'm quite jazzed about. I had an opportunity to work within Canada, what we call the CSA, the Canadian Standards Association, and I was chairing an organization, and we're just releasing as of tomorrow a new Canadian standard for natural asset inventories. So it's the first baby step here in Canada on how we actually answer questions like, what do you own? What is it worth? And what condition is it in for physical or natural asset inventories? So things like rivers, trees, natural stormwater treatment, those kind of things, as assets that also provide services. It's not just a beautiful tree that provides, like an opportunity for us to relax under and shade, but actually it does provide ecosystem services and is an important part of our physical infrastructure. And we need to care and feed it no differently we would our physical infrastructure or our data assets.
Well, that is wonderful on many levels. Let me first start by inviting you to help us set up a in-person event at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., so that we can embarrass the U.S. into doing some of the things that you described that your government did. It's like you're a poster child, and we really just need to get the message out for people to be looking at Calgary and understanding what you're doing there. So I'll
And
talk.
I will say it's not just Calgary. This is something for me that I feel so privileged to be part of a really incredible nation pushing forward on so many different fronts, working together though, as building these kind of standards. So the natural asset inventory really came from a groundswell from British Columbia and a lot of a different community of practice, a group of biologists and natural asset inventory managers that are saying, you know what, we see what's going on in how we're managing our physical infrastructure, our engineered assets. Why can't we also do the same thing from natural asset perspective? So there's also provincial bodies that are as well, working together here in Alberta, in Ontario, in British Columbia, just to say the least. So I have to give credit where credit is due. It's a huge undertaking across an entire nation to start to propel forward our asset management practice. And
Okay,
maybe
we'll invite everyone.
part of that. Yeah, I'm gonna just add one last plug too. Our Federation of Canadian Municipalities has spent literally $100 million plus on building out asset management practice. So it's a massive commitment at a national level to build infrastructure asset management practices and build training programs. So I think that is the type of model that other nations could aspire to.
Well, we're very serious about highlighting that. And I think the Canadian Embassy on Pennsylvania Avenue would be a great place to do that. But we'll talk about that later. So then the second thing is that the team of people who are doing the presentation after yours, we're doing a tree storm, an AI brainstorm using artificial intelligence, digital twins, and governed by asset management to treat trees as an asset. And we're going to show how we can tie the different measurements for a healthy tree, healthy grouping of trees, forest or park or campus, whatever, and tie that to a cryptocurrency. And the American Journal of Economics and Sociology is going to write up our findings and publish it in 2024. So
that's
this, I want to talk with you about this. The timing is really incredible. We're going to announce that at the end of the presentation today. So, wow. We'll continue to be in touch. So you wear a lot of hats, and you were just at in Philadelphia about the TC 251 meeting. Do you want to say anything about the upcoming ISO 55000 and 55001 documents?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So exactly as you said, Mike, one of the other hats I wear is as the vice chair for the Canadian Mirror Committee. And I've been part of ISO 55000, then it was PC 251, now TC 251, the technical committee, since 2010. So it was great conversations. It's really amazing to come out of a pandemic where we're working while this virtual thing here in front of us that we're all on right now is fantastic, bringing people from around the planet in a simple way. We were really missing the face-to-face collaboration, which is absolutely necessary, especially when you're working on very tough documents, international documents like ISO 55000. So I must say, if you've never been involved, get involved. It is, sorry, that's a shameless plug, but it is opportunity to work with some pretty incredible minds. I'm always blown away with the level of conversation and professionalism and some really hard topics that we wrestle with. So you're right. Many of our products we're seeing what we call 55011, 12, and 13. So in around data as an asset. That's one of the topics. The other one is around really creating, as I was alluding to with FCM and what we've done here in Canada, is trying to capture and can that and try and make a business case for creating public policy across a nation and building asset management capabilities. So that's another one of our standards. And something that we're actually just kickstarting now is a technical working group on the implementation of sustainability principles and natural asset management, as I was talking about. So there's some really cool stuff that's kicking off. Not to mention is an update on the O1 document itself. The 0001 and O2 documents. So the 3 core documents as well. We're just getting into draft, I believe, what we call DIS, or draft international standards. So it would be, I believe, publication, if my memory works correctly, we would be targeting early of 2024. So there's lots of good stuff on the go right now.
Keeping you busy.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's great.
So how has your job change impacted what you do?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love it. Right now, what I do, it's fantastic to come full circle in my career, to move through from operations and what I would call grassroots engineering back into grassroots engineering. So I've gone through a point where it was more about 10 years ago or so being our corporate advocate for great asset management practice and policy owner and really helping to build the stage of what asset management is and what it isn't as well. And now coming around to managing, inspecting physical infrastructure like our bridges, our pavement and building life cycle plans, and starting to rethink our physical strategies. So what I find my role is really been about is where our corporate realignment, as necessary as it has broken processes and it's broken relationships. And so internally, what I really get focused on right now is trying to rebuild those relationships and rebuild those processes to continue at the front line our businesses. So we keep moving forward where Calgarians are still getting those great services that they are paying for and they expect every day. Their bridges are in safe condition, their pavement is still working the way it should be. So my role really has become very focused on ensuring that our practice is at a grassroots level, is intact, and we have those right relationships with our operations going forward.
So the ALN is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and
Congrats.
Thank you. And it took me that long to realize it's about people. It's about culture. It's about human behavior. And I'm really glad to hear that is part of a mature asset manager's role, is relationship repairing and building.
Absolutely, it is.
So there's one thing that's going on in Calgary. It's not directly related to asset management, but it sort of is. You're encouraging apartments in downtown Calgary. You want people to live downtown.
So yes, it's not directly part of our asset management program, but philosophically, if you can think of it as asset management as a philosophy, this is really what this is about, is rethinking our downtown strategy. So we actually have a group, an organization that is focused on downtown strategy. So if you think coming out of the economic downturn, say starting in 2015, our downtown core was gutted. We were, if my memory serves, order of magnitude, you're talking around, say, 30, 35, 40% vacancy rates in our downtown core. So those skyscrapers, those towers that exist downtown, rethinking what exactly is the purpose of those towers. So some of those towers may have been predominantly office space. Now rethinking, could they actually, as part of a larger strategy to make our downtown core a vibrant and resilient place, a place where people congregate, a place where people go, and not just because they have to go there during business hours, but how do you actually make it a 24/7 type of operation where people live and they hang out, and that's their place they live. So a lot of our towers are being converted, these downtown towers, office towers, be converted to residential. A lot of them, we're actually have an experiment where some of them might be farms, vertical towers converted into farms, and there's a whole host of engineering and technology issues related to that. but nonetheless, there are some pilots. And as well, too, about taking some of those towers and converting them to housing, affordable housing, and things of the like. So it's allowing us as an organization also to rethink our ownership strategy, perhaps in the downtown core. So we're looking at opportunities, partnering with other parts of industry to rethink, what could our downtown core look like as from a tower's perspective.
Excellent. So perfect timing, because
Good segue.
yeah, we're gonna wrap this up formally. If Nick could come on and do our closeout, and then we're gonna do a prelude to our upcoming presentation. Since you have a couple minutes, Kimon Onuma and Cyril Verlet are going to show you how they have designed a building information model of an apartment tower with all of the assets in it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day wherever you are on the planet.
Thank you so much, Steve. And with that, we'd also like to thank our Platinum organizational member, Onuma System, as well as Jacobs, ABS Quality Evaluations, CGI, and Definitive Logic for their patron membership, and all our organizational members that make programming like this in our newsletter possible. So please reach out if you're interested in talking about membership. We would love to figure out how we can work together for everyone's benefit. And so this next program that I think you'll get a good preface to here in just a moment will be with Kimon Onuma and Cyril Verlet about harvesting BIM. And very exciting stuff related to the program that we just had. And I'm sure we'll have a very thorough segue here in just a moment. And then one more event upcoming July 13th between Mike Imany and Jack Dempsey about a National Academy of Sciences and Medicine strategies for renewing federal facilities. Okay, Mike, take us to overtime.
Thanks again. Well, I don't know if this is overtime or if it's prelude, or it's probably both, a little bit of both.
Overtime now, prelude in 15 minutes.
Yeah. So Steve and Cyril and Kimon, if you could come on, I'd like to publicly introduce you. You met prior to the program. But Cyril and Kimon, that's pretty similar to what you saw in Tokyo. So let me explain that the Asset Leadership Network has a series of programs this year that are supported by Onuma Inc. and CDV Systems that show how to use artificial intelligence with digital twins governed by asset management to drive dramatic improvements in mission outcomes for organizations. And first we did education, then Kimon did a project with the American Institute of Architects Japan chapter, where they had a empty space in downtown Tokyo, and through the magic of virtual buildings, it was filled up. So Kimon, you want to show Steve a little bit about what you did?
Sure. Let me share my screen. She can confirm that it's coming through.
Yes, it is.
So this is a little preview of what we're going to be showing in the next hour. But what I'm starting with is a mapping tool. It's called Cesium that we're testing that you can fly around the world. And it's kind of like Google Earth. We use that as a place to start landing some of the plans that we were building up in the part of Tokyo. So this is the empty lot in Tokyo. It used to be a warehouse, kind of a fish market area. And this is all 3D, and the public buildings that they have, the public 3D models that are accessible online. I think they're from OpenStreetMap. But we basically took that and we said, let's start doing some quick planning with the program requirements. And we used a combination of AI, architects participating, and figuring out how we can fit all these different assets, including even put a cutter here. It landed a Coast Guard cutter because we had one in our library. But we focused on apartment buildings, corporate apartment housing. And that's what these massing models are here. And you'll see later on a much more detailed model of this, but each of these is basically a block and you could get information about what's here. Okay, there's a living room here and it's on this floor. You can zoom around to different parts of it and actually even say, okay, let's look at it. And what does a 3D model of it look like? It pops open a model and it looks like this, a building information model. And inside this model, you'll see the level of detail we have. This is all driven from a database that it has the owner's requirements. So if they're managing corporate housing, they want to get down to managing individual pieces of furniture and equipment. So like a kitchen cabinet there, for example, has all kinds of attributes that are coming from another tool that we'll be showing later from CDV, which is Collectus, to help guide the development and planning of these buildings. This was done in a very short time period. And we had several of these in Tokyo. But the interesting thing is we said, okay, if this is a prototype, and we knew that this session was coming up, okay, this is in Tokyo, what it looks like, you can fly around here. But we said, let's just take some of these programs. There's some housing and a college on the right there with student housing, another bigger building here. And we said, let's take it to Calgary, knowing that we're having this session today. We also had work orders and preventive maintenance. So it's the full life cycle. We essentially simulated the entire life cycle of an asset management approach. And in the last screen here, we're still in Tokyo here, but we said, okay, now we're ready to go. Let's take this whole program and just land it in Calgary. Not to say that this is the actual project, but it illustrates how fast, if you have good data and good tools and layer an AI on top of this, which we'll be talking about in the next session, how we used AI to help guide the humans, basically the designers, to make decisions. So this is the exact same building now in Calgary. Obviously, probably needs some design changes and everything. And if we turn off on the existing buildings, like you were saying, Steve, we're running scenarios like that too. If you have an existing building, do we build new, or can we renovate and fit this housing program into an existing building? So having kind of that programmatic asset data-driven approach first, and then using this granular level of information to say, okay, we want to see what's inside this unit. Well, we're looking at one unit now instead of the whole building. Now we're going to load up one of the units. Any comments? I kind of rambled on here, but just this is an open session before we get into the formal presentation here, but that's what we'll be showing. There's a lot more than this, obviously, but
well, Steve, it wasn't the 3D model of Calgary, but did you see where it was? Could you get a sense of the map?
Yeah, I did actually. That's just on the north part of our downtown core, north central, by what we call Prince's Island Park. So interestingly, that location is existing infrastructure, and we're looking at redeveloping right now, as a matter of fact, because that will be fairly proximal. Oh no, that actually is what we call 10th Street. So a little further over to the east is where we'll be putting our new LRT line under the river. So we're actually looking at redeveloping a good portion of that land.
Interesting. Yeah. We just randomly selected a spot. We had no idea about where it's good or not, but that's kind of the beauty of this. When you start seeing it graphically, what it looks like, you can start having conversations. Is this a good spot to put it in or not? That's kind of the scenario planning that we tend to do with all of this. So. And the Google Earth version of this has actually the 3D, the models of the buildings and everything. This one's just a flat view, kind of an aerial view, but you can actually have the
so
models
one of the
sitting on top of it. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the interesting things about Calgary was they incentivized the conversions of the buildings with grants and tax breaks, and that type of program information could be incorporated into these models, and it could be done for existing buildings too. Is that right, Cyril?
Yeah,
that's correct, Kimon. Yep, I think that's correct, Mike. I think you'll see later in the presentation the ability of taking a variety of data types and being able to, bring it into a system that allows a variety of data types to be viewed from one viewer, in essence. And that's, for me, that's quite exciting. our perspective is looking more towards the BIM side, but from Kamon's perspective, it's sort of taking whatever type of data format the client might have. So it's whether it's a CAD file or PDFs or JPEGs, but somehow making it visual within this format. Quite exciting.
And actually converting offices to affordable housing is very practical, because an issue in converting high-rise offices to apartments is plumbing. And there's the need for so much more plumbing in traditional apartments. But with affordable units, Steve, am I right? In there can be collected restroom areas and kitchen areas, and then people live in spaces that might not require plumbing?
Well, not necessarily. Well, the answer is yes, it could be. We have many different types of designs depending on the type of building. If it's hostel type or a hostel versus a single family or a multiple family, whatever it looks like. So there's multiple types of building designs.
And then you changed permitting, right? Do you think that this type of visual exploration of assets could help with the permitting process if people wanted variances? Or, I mean, that's not your department. But.
That's, I unfortunately, yeah, that's not my world. I can't comment on, yeah, thanks.
But we wanted to show you how we were thinking of you, and you're really advanced, but wanted to expose you to some of the innovative things that are happening with the Asset Leadership Network members. It's a real privilege to have people come together and say, hey, your peanut butter goes well with my chocolate.
Yeah, and I guess one interesting thing too is it's the scale of the assets, right? You're talking the whole city scale, but then you would need to zoom in at some point to get into the building. So this is actually the same building where we set up in Calgary that we want to go to the 5th floor. And this is an occupant facing interface where you start saying, okay, there's something going on in this unit. The air conditioner is not working. I want to report something happening here. We'll be going through a live exercise with this as well too. It's hot in this room. So it's basically feeding into a database. It's what's called digital twin. You've probably heard that term before, but it's the equivalent of what you have online. So you're linking what's happening in the building to the occupants of the building, to the system supporting the building, to the energy that's supporting the city. That kind of connectivity starts becoming really powerful when you have these systems talking to each other. And I think that's the angle of ISO that's going to be really interesting as you start standardizing at least the very simple connections to be able to communicate between systems that typically have been disconnected and very difficult and complex to maintain and manage. So a lot of our message really is about, we're showing some tools obviously, but really it's about how do you connect different tools that are typically competing in many cases, so you don't have to recreate the data and recollect it. And the data as an asset, it really becomes an asset once you start thinking in those terms to make the data neutral.